I'd like to call the Tuesday, July 18th meeting of the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors to order. Ms. Cronin, will you call the roll? Or Mr. Baines, would you call
I'll certainly do it, sir. Thank you. Yeah. Mr. Gibson.
Here.
Dr. Orth.
Here.
Mr. Smith. Mr. Hutson.
Here.
Mr. Chriscoe.
Here.
Mr. Hedrick.
Here.
Mr. Bazzani.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Reason Mr. Baines is there, not Ms. Steele, she's she's expecting the newest Gloucesterian anytime now. So we actually told her about an hour ago, stay there. So if you join me in invocation of Pledge of Allegiance by Mr. Ken Gibson.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening asking for your guidance, your wisdom, your protection, and your blessing as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion, encourage us to work together cooperatively and in good faith, to act always in the best interest of our community. Guide us as we make decisions that will affect the citizens of Gloucester County. We pray that you bless our county, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and our great nation. Bless and protect all of our first responders and those who serve in our armed services who stand in harm's way. We ask all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Move to the approval of the minutes from March 21st.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next item is adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Chair, I would like to amend the agenda to add a closed meeting for personnel matters. And then with that, I will make the motion to approve as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Approval. There is no consent agenda to approve. Matters presented by the board. I was waiting for somebody else. Yesterday, Mr. Chriscoe and I, we met up in King and Queen with Lieutenant Governor. She had a tour of Fulcrum Concepts and a couple other businesses in the county. It was very interesting the way different things that she's pursuing to try to help the county, the Middle Peninsula in general. And it was a lot of interesting points were made. It was a good visit, and hopefully we'll get some good things from it. So, anything else? Matters presented by the board.
To add on to Mr. Hudson's comments, the chair of the Middle Peninsula, the executive director of the Middle Peninsula Planning District Commission was also in attendance, and we got to mention some of the neat things that we're trying to do for our region as far as our flood issues and things that are going on that nature, and the amount of business we're trying to drive here. And the Lieutenant Governor was very appreciative of our efforts and has said that if we need red carpet rollout for anybody who's coming wanting to locate here, to let her know, and she will do her best to be here or send somebody from the state government to make sure we have everybody we need here to shake hands with somebody who's looking to locate. So it's very helpful and nice to know that they are on our side to try to get us our economy growing in a different fashion.
We need to change the agenda again, because this is Deputy County Administrator items. Mr. Baines.
I only really have one other than you already mentioned that Carol's not here tonight because she's expecting her first grandchild. But the other thing is that on building 1 and 2, we've completed the ADA doors on the back so that they're more accessible to our citizens as they come and go from our offices.
Thank you. We'll move to citizen comment period. If anyone would like to speak on the items on the agenda for the meeting, please come forward, state your name, your magisterial district, and you've got 3 minutes. Don't all run up or roll up at once.
Oh, there's a new one there handy for you.
Take it here. That one's wireless. Even this end from it's wireless.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Baines, Howard Mowry, York District. It's that time of the year again when the old fiscal year closes and portions of all debt have been paid off. Now is the time to in-debt the people of Gloucester deeper into the hole. The current mindset before the elections is to achieve this process since it may not occur after an election. But some debt is necessary. This is true, and I will explain. The need to raise taxes is mute, not called for. The need to extend debt to 2053, uncalled for. Hans F. Senholz wrote, a government debt is a government claim against personal income and private property, an unpaid tax bill, unquote. A special interest, our capital reserve fund, has a balance of 1.4 million. If this sum shown in the monthly treasurer's report as cash in hand or as a CD, anybody can put together a spreadsheet to send somebody else's money, even if they don't reside here. The key is, will most of our elected fall for this outline as presented tonight? Reviewing the proposed spreadsheet of approximately $35 million is a fabulous wish list. So how do you as a board consider each line item as presented? My opinion, for what it's worth, items 1 and 2 are necessary. Items 10 and 12 need serious consideration, but is a 20-year debt program necessary for items 10 and 12? Item 8, I was able to have a guided tour today of the high school sports complex and the surrounding facilities. This debt needs to be taken on, but at the same time, blame for these conditions rests with the prior boards, yes, both boards, for not presenting the actual existing conditions, and the other for not aggressively seeking funding to bring these properties up to the current safe conditions and ADA compliant, which they are not. This debt request needs to be separated by line item and re-presented at another public meeting. Additionally, a budget FMRR program needs to be put in place immediately by the school system, outlining by line item and estimated cost annually what will be the cost to maintain the people's assets in prime conditions. Items 3, 4, 6 through 9, and 11 can be put on hold. We the people, yes, the taxpayer of this wish list needs to understand that the economy over the next 2 years is unknown and will be highly dependent on our state and national elections. Also, are you willing, as our elected representatives, to jeopardize our credit rating in this climate today? As Thomas Jefferson said, quote, to preserve our independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our election between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude, unquote. I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Mowry. Would anyone else like?
Catherine Carter, Abingdon District. The last meeting I was here, I was told that a lesson in the Constitution was not necessary, like as a boring history lesson. These two constitutions, the federal and the state, are what you all have signed sworn oaths to support. They are contracts with the people. In fact, not one is superior to another. Amendment 9 says, the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. There are 50 state constitutions, and they include rights retained by the people, but not all of them. Our unalienable rights are unlimited. Article 1, Section 17 of the Virginia Constitution. The rights enumerated in this Bill of Rights shall not be construed to limit other rights of the people not therein mentioned. That means none of the founders or writers, framers of these constitutions could begin to name all unalienable rights. Now, since this is a contract between the people, and I can prove that, let's see, by the preamble, a declaration of rights made by the good people of Virginia in the exercise of their sovereign powers. Which rights? Now, these powers are rights, and they're not the power of God. God gave us the political power. And when you all are not in your official capacity, you have unlimited unalienable rights. But in your official capacity, you only have a portion that you have derived from the people that have been legislated by the General Assembly. And so, which rights do pertain to them, the people, and their posterity as the basis and foundation of government. And whenever you make a statement, an opinion, give a reason for your vote, give a reason for your motion, second the motion, you need to put it in the context of one of these sections in Article 1, which is our Bill of Rights, for your rationale. Because if it's not in the context of that, and it's not supporting this Constitution that you have a signed sworn oath to protect, to support, then you could be in danger of maladministration, and that's very serious. But before that, I want to continue. As far as the budget, I think a very inexpensive concession to the recreation would be to convert tennis courts or actually combine them into pickleball courts. Why? Because pickleball is multi-generational. It is one of the least expensive forms of recreation there are. It attracts people from all over. It is contagious. It's not the old stodgy tennis, well, I might play with you. Everybody plays with everybody on the
Ms.
pickleball
Carter,
court.
Thank you.
time's up if you would just wrap up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes my remarks.
Would anyone else like to make a comment?
Since you asked, yes, I would. I'm Susan Austin of the York District. I'm here to offer my opinion on what I understand will be an effort to saddle we the people with never-ending debt. While I support items 1 and 2, we need our fire departments to be fully funded. I speak as a former firefighter, not in this state, but I understand how they are forced to make things run. Anyway, in the Constitution of Virginia, Article 1, Sections 1, 2, 3, and 15, I object to the saddling of me and my posterity with tax and fiscal burdens, not for the common good because they are burdensome, Section 1. I speak up for myself and my family, and since you are our magistrates, our trustees and servants, you are to be at all times amenable to us, Section 2. This burden of office with which you struggle constantly is, or ought to be, instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people and community, and that is best which produces the greatest degree of happiness and safety and is most effectually secured against the danger of maladministration. The danger of maladministration is a curious one. Not that the items contained in this bill are onerous. It's just that in this era of inflation, depression, and looming national bankruptcy, this seems to be an apt description of maladministration. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Would anyone else like to speak? Okay, we'll close the citizen comment period. I mean, not close it, but Ms. Cronin, I know you have one email.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. From Blake Mabe of the Abingdon District. I am very confused on why the county is considering spending over $4 million just on Woodville Park and another $12.5 million on parks and a sports complex. Not only is the county considering it, they are showing how the real estate owners would pay for it just after talking about lower-income elderly people are not able to pay the real estate taxes they have now. It would go a long way if the county could show some sort of return on investment when proposing spending on parks and recreation. Maybe add a column on the spreadsheet showing income produced from the parks that could be used to help pay for it. Otherwise, it just looks like if you work hard and acquire a home, you are on the hook to provide for the rest of the county. I would suggest putting it on the ballot as a referendum showing an increase to the sales tax in the county, so everyone has to pay for it, and a majority of the people would have to be on board for it to happen. Then you could say the people have spoken. That was all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Okay. We'll move to our work session agenda. We have a public hearing to consider the conveyance of real property at 3799 and 3823 George Washington Highway. Has this been properly advertised?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right, Mr. Baines, do you want to start us?
Yes, sir. So as the board is aware that the property for the old county garage and radio well, that we had taken those properties and had tried to, first we leased from Bay Transit to move our garage down there, so we no longer use the garage that's there. In 2022, we put out an RFP to offer the property up for sale to interested parties. Nobody replied to the RFP. In April of this year, we received an unsolicited offer for the two pieces of property for $275,000 and by the adjoining property owner. So tonight you're here to talk about it. Mr. Clark is not here, but he does have Mr. Parlett here representing him if y'all have any questions.
Okay. Any questions?
One question, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Bazzani?
Probably asked this before, but what is the assessed value of that property?
I do believe it's right around the offer price, that we put whatever the assessed value is on the property. There was some downgrade of the property because of the buildings on it, but he's willing to take the property as is. We had an estimate of about $60,000 to clear the building off of it. He's taken it as is.
And who is the new owner, can we say?
It would be the person who's got the property next door that's for Carol Lot, so it'd be the same owner. He wants to purchase both pieces to be on that side of 17.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's open the citizen comment period. If there's any citizen that would like to come forward and talk about it, roll on up.
Thank you. Either Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Howard Maury, York. Here we go again, the great giveaway of the people's property, unknown to many of the citizens since they have acquiesced their civic responsibility to their governing. I found it interesting that when the assessments were accomplished upon the public, the values soared through the roof. But lo and behold, this was not true for some of our own government property belonging to the people. So here we are tonight, selling off our prime property for a price of $275,000. Let's step back and look at this deal. One parcel, RPC 12425, 023 assessment, set at $112,310. The 022 value assessed at $140,720. Parcel RPC 19689, 023 assessed at $271,650. In 022 assessed at $306,810. Combined 023 value is $383,960. 02 value was $457,530. The possible norm in real property sales may hover around 15%. If this be the case, then possibly the value should be increased between $58,000 and $69,000. As businessmen selling the people's assets, how much do you think a fair price is that best suits all the people in this time of inflated property for tax purposes? Was a fair assessment accomplished, even if the argument goes towards depreciation? I believe the people deserve a higher selling value that will benefit the county overall, even though the funds will be dumped into the general fund and not earmarked for a special project. I recommend you reconsider this prime piece of real estate selling value and consider a rebid, or was there no bid for this property and considerations were accomplished in closed session. I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Would anyone else like to speak about this public hearing? All right, we'll close the citizen comment period. Does anybody have any questions? Mr. Gibson.
Mr. Baines, how long has the property been advertised, and have there been any previous offers on the property?
We advertised it for the first time in July of 2022, and for the period we had it open, we got no offers. So since then, it has not been on the market. This was unsolicited to us. It was just because the gentleman had bought the piece of property next door and came to us with an offer. So 2022 is when we first put it up for offer. Before that, it was the county garage.
Mr. Gibson.
Do we know the intended use of the property?
No, sir. Well, we can't ask him for those type of information, but he is building or was expecting to build care lot next door to it. And through the site plan process, some of the issues he had was with that intersection and the way you can make turns from the north. By purchasing our piece of property, it'll open up that intersection for him because that was on the county side. His property didn't go in to where the light came across. So my best guess is he wants just better access to that intersection for north and southbound traffic.
Mr. Bazzani.
Are there any zoning issues in case, let's say he wants to sell it to a developer for whatever reason?
I think, and Ann's not here tonight, but I do believe that the way it's zoned right now, it's zoned for business. I actually had one of them open. But if he wanted to do anything else with the property besides business, he would have to come back. If he wanted to do something like housing or something else, he'd have to come back and rezone the property.
Mr. Hedrick.
I'll address this to Mr. Baines. Mr. Baines, did you say that there would be an additional cost of $60,000 to tear the old building down?
Yes, sir.
Are there any other related expenses that he more than likely will incur?
There was one for, the other piece of property had a deed restriction because it was a well for our public water system, that you couldn't use it for any other use. But the board had appropriated money 2 years ago to close that radio well, and we closed it and turned in all the paperwork to the health department. So that released the other deed restriction. So right now, there's nothing else we've got to do. There is a second building on the property, and that's where the old radio well was, and we'll have to clear that also.
Thank you.
Dr. Orth.
Yeah, I think that the gentleman who is planning to build has shown us some pictures of his previous building in other localities.
Yes, sir.
And I think it's going to improve the site given what's currently there. And I think by putting this property for sale and purchase, and I think it's going to put a lot of stuff back on the sales tax, sales rolls. So I think there is a benefit, and we can argue about whether we should have gotten more or not. But the fact is that, he's a good builder, he's reputable, and I think that we'll be looking at a reasonably nice facility that he will build there along with his pet care place. And they're successful. I mean, you may want to argue about it, but, from what we've seen in the pictures, they've done really well. And I'm sure he wouldn't do it if he didn't think he was going to be successful here.
I have one copy of the pictures, if any other board member wants to see what they look like, of his other care lots.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
Mr.
with
Chriscoe.
the current state of those three properties right there, the improvement that's going to come is going to be a very welcomed addition to our county. With the amount of work that has to go into it to make it so that he can develop these, it'd be great to have everybody pay top dollar for everything, but I think with what his investment is going to be on top of the purchase price, he's going to be paying in excess of the value of these properties, and his work that he has to do will absolutely make this corner look a lot better, because that corner hasn't changed much in the 40 plus years that I've been driving up and down that road.
The other thing that, I think that could happen, given that's an important intersection, there is the potential for further development by other businesses right there, since they've got a light and they've got turn lanes and everything. So this could be at least the beginning of a complex of buildings along that area that could make that a very attractive place. So we don't know, but I think that there are some interesting prospects that could be looking at the property across the street on Providence Road.
We've had quite a few people look at that piece, but because of the VDOT restrictions, it's been a very hard location to have somebody. So with this additional piece of property, he may be able to actually do something there that others haven't been able to.
Any more questions, comments? There's a resolution on page 13.
A motion to approve, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Baines, will you call the roll?
I certainly will, sir. Mr. Bazzani?
Yes.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
Dr. Orth? Yes. Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
All approved.
Next item on the agenda is long-range planning for future capital needs.
And even though it says my name on it, we're going to allow Ms. Callaway to do this presentation because she's been working with Davenport.
I believe it says Ms. Steele.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I know, but on mine, I changed it to her name before we even started, so I know who we were going to pull up to the podium, but it's Ms. Callaway.
Well, good evening. So last week, Ms. Steele, our financial advisors at Davenport, and I met with board members to discuss this long-range borrowing plan. A few questions came up during those discussions, so I provided some handouts tonight, and I just want to go over those briefly, and then I'll let Davenport go over the updated analysis. So the first handout we have is called Long-Term Borrowing Risk Management. So it's just got some bullet points on it. So one of the questions that came up was that how are we considering what risk this may pose to the county? So we've come up with, you know, obviously lots of different ideas as we've gone through this, but here's what we've narrowed down just as some very specific bullet points. First, the proposed financing only includes the sale of one parcel of GVF, Gloucester Volunteer Fire and Rescue property. So there are several other parcels that if this plan were to go through would potentially generate up to $2.5 million in revenue. These funds could obviously go for PAYGO. They could also be used for bond payments, lowering the tax rate, whatever types of things you would like to do. Secondly, the plan doesn't anticipate any additional revenue through growth that generally occurs naturally. However, we have built in an inflationary factor into the expenses. So that's something that's in the board packet that we used a graph to build in a 2.6% simple inflationary cost for each year that a project is pushed out to try to build in that factor, as well as a 10% contingency. Thirdly, the borrowing would occur on an annual basis, so this would not be something we would do all at one time. So it could be reevaluated and at the time that we have capacity and based on how the economy is looking. If something happens and the economy takes a turn for the worst, the spending plan could be modified, we could delay projects, we would take whatever measures necessary at that point. Lastly, the same with the construction plans. So there's several different options that Ms. Steele has provided, and those construction plans are spaced out by year. And so we would have to be reevaluating those construction plans as we do the borrowings and as we evaluate the economy. So those are some items that we've considered as far as managing the risk with the consideration of this borrowing. So secondly, we have a handout regarding the CIP. So that's called Capital Improvement FY 2024 to 28 projects and F&R needs. So what this handout does is goes through the projects that were considered during our FY 2024 capital improvement plan. That the projects that are ranked were projects that were submitted to us as FY 24 requests. So those were ranked, and those scores are the combined need and impact scores from the Planning Commission. So then the ones that are listed as NA were submitted as FY 2025 or later. One note on this is that we have had some discussions on body tot, and that is shown on this listing as an FY 25 request. However, we have had discussions with the schools regarding the inclusion of the sports complex, and considering that as more of a priority, where if we can get body tot pushed out a little bit later, still accomplished, but get the sports complex, we could move those dates a little bit. All right, so then the next one is the spending plan. So this was on pages 30 and 31 of your packet, and I've provided an updated spreadsheet to replace that. It has a few yellow highlighted cells. We had to make a couple of tweaks in a last review to some of the expenditures, very small tweaks. So those are all highlighted, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Lastly, we have Davenport here, as I mentioned. Mr. Cole is here to discuss the updated analysis that we have provided you. There's a bound copy at your spots. So I will hand it to Mr. Cole unless anybody has initial questions. All right. Oh.
Mr. Bazzani.
Before we begin, Mr. Chair, I'd like to just do 2 or 3 minutes of what I feel we're doing here going forward, if everyone doesn't mind. I'd like to address this important matter. When we had our 2-on-1 discussion, there was a lot of discussion on inherent risk, and I appreciate what you did here as far as enumerating what the risk might be. There's still probably more risk in terms of what revenues may come in, lower or higher. But I'm really concerned about the financial stability of the county and what that might mean to the taxpayer. There is an inherent risk of taking on more debt, and we're going to hear from the Davenport folks. They did a good job of laying out for us how much credit or how much we can max out our credit card with respect to these capital projects. And I understand they're not going to be done in one full year. They'll be spread out. Some may advocate for maxing out our county's credit card, but I believe that we must approach this situation carefully and move forward cautiously before burdening the taxpayers with additional financial obligations. And so I say we should carefully evaluate our debt situation, explore its complications, and ultimately answer the critical question: should Gloucester County increase its debt on top of the significant debt on the books? First and foremost, let's consider what's going on with our high school. I had the good fortune to take a tour through Mr. Hartley's efforts and through Mr. Recker's effort to actually tour the sports complex. And I, you know, as everybody knows me, you know, everybody, I'm a needs versus wants person. And in this case, I see that the sports complex is a need. There are things in there that need to be updated, ADA compliance issues. There are the other things that need to be done to get that complex more amenable to the students and the people who will use it. But in particular, I see Woodville Park, where we've already poured in $1 million in CARES Act, ARPA funding to level that field. And we went over there, I went over there today to look at that, and they're actually doing the work and they're actually leveling the field. But I say 2 things. We support the fire department, number 1, but we also support the sports complex. Smartly do the sports complex. We're going to we're proposing to pour about $7.1 million into Woodville, and I say enough is enough for Woodville. We've done what we're going to do with that place. It's going to be basically a soccer field for the good folks who want to play there, but there's not that much more we can do to that. I'm opposed to sending water and sewer down there, because that's going to eventually enrich adjacent property owners as a result of that. So let's proceed with caution and prudence, and let's look out for our taxpayers. We have an election coming up. Some of us here are lame duck candidates who may or may not be here come November. I hope that we don't make any decisions tonight about what capital projects we want to pursue tonight, but we should wait for 2 things. Number 1, the November elections, and number 2, what's going to happen to our country when we have possibly a new president that's going to change the way the federal government spends its money and causes the inflation we're currently experiencing right now. So I yield back to the floor, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bazzani. Would anyone else like to say anything before Mr. Cole comes up?
Just one thing, I do appreciate, Mr. Bazzani and I had the 2-on-1 and spent well over an hour and a half going through some of the documents that were here tonight, and I very much appreciate the time and effort that you put in to explain the situation that we are going to discuss tonight.
Great, thank you. Appreciate it. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think all of you have the booklet that I'm talking from. There are page numbers in the bottom right corner. And we did have some productive conversations over the course of last week on this presentation. And I think it's important just to sort of frame our discussion. Our goal throughout this, and specifically this evening, is to try to give you all the best information we can to make some decisions. So we're not here to advocate one way or the other that this is a good plan or a bad plan, and where do you need to spend money, what capital projects are more important than others. That's not our job. We don't know enough about your community to make those decisions. But hopefully, what you walk away with is an understanding of what is potential and how it would work. And again, it allows you to make an informed decision when you need to, related to capital projects and a potential referendum. So starting off on page 2, this is the existing debt for the county as it stands at the close of the last fiscal year, just a few weeks back, about $57.9 million. And a large portion of that, in the graph in the upper left, the dark green portion, and below that what's called eligible for sales tax, is about $30.8 million. That was, or is, debt that was issued specifically to be paid back from the 1% sales tax that was voted. That is the dedicated source of repayment for that dark green level of debt every year, goes out to 2043. And there is still more debt to issue behind that for the Gloucester High School, and that's something that I suspect we'll be back to talk about in upcoming meetings. But there is more to be done there in that dark green section for Gloucester High School. What we're really going to focus on is the debt that is not associated with the sales tax. So it's school debt that is not eligible for the sales tax, and then general county debt. Okay, and you can see that more clearly on page 3. All we've done is we've stripped out that eligible for sales tax component of the debt. So what that means is we're talking about $27 million of debt outstanding. You can see on the right-hand side the debt there that is tied to schools goes out to 2043 in the light green, and the non-school debt, we call it county debt, goes out to 2033. The red line is just meant to show you sort of where that current level of annual debt service payments, principal and interest, are in FY24 and beyond. And it's right at, I'm going to round up slightly, $5.2 million a year. And so what we're going to be embarking on is, this may not mean anything to you all with my clicker, but it's sort of understanding how much debt is out there, or how much debt could be issued and allow us to sort of remain at that same level of 5.2 million. We've got a case that does that, sort of essentially correlating all of this white space into potential debt issuances in the future. And then we got a couple of cases where we go above that, and I'll explain what's behind those cases here shortly. So that's what we're dealing with. All of that debt is fixed rate. The payments will not change unless you do something to change that debt proactively. Importantly is page 4. How do you pay for that level of debt? Fairly straightforward and simple budgeting process. Starting on the left-hand side, we start with 2024 fiscal year, which is the year we're now in. The majority of funding that is being used to repay that debt is in column B, and it's a local transfer from debt service, just general county revenues. Not that 1% sales tax that was voted, but essentially any other unrestricted general county revenues, property taxes, etc. And that's at $4.3 million a year, and we have assumed that is available or can be made available every year going forward. That is a key assumption in the analysis, that amount
will not drop. Now, how many pennies does it take to generate that will vary. If we're in a growing economy or a shrinking economy, a recession, your ability to provide $4.3 million a year could be easier or more difficult depending on what's going on in your budget. That's something we talked about, is the risk of that assumption, and I certainly appreciate that, but we got to start somewhere for a base case, and that is we're going to assume that that $4.3 million a year is available every year going forward. Column C is specific revenue tied to two specific bond issues that is a subsidy that comes back to you all from the federal government for interest you pay on those bonds. That was a stimulus act bond mechanism, about $237,000 a year, and it will end in 2035 when that debt's paid off. So your exposure to the federal government is really the risk in those revenues. We're assuming that they will make good on their promise to pay, but they could decide to do something different. And then finally, column D are debt service savings that were recognized through a refunding that the Virginia Public School Authority did on your behalf. They refunded debt at lower interest rates, they generated savings. The way that they pass those savings on to you all is year by year, you're getting a credit for lower debt service. So that is a savings or a revenue coming back to you that offsets some existing debt. And again, you do have exposure that they continue to make those savings available to you, but I think it's exposure to the Commonwealth of Virginia and the VPSA. I think it's highly unlikely that they won't do that, but in the interest of transparency and a discussion about risk, there is some risk there. Column E is blank for now. That'll come into play later. And then column F is some one-time dollars. FY24 only, $1,925,000. Footnote 3 at the bottom, it's made up of 3 pots of money. $500,000 from the county's general fund. It was appropriated or will be appropriated for the 24 budget to make part of your payment on the York County radio leases. I think that's been discussed through your budget, $500,000. And then there's $425,000 from the sale of a parcel at Gloucester Volunteer Fire and Rescue Squad. Don't hold me to it. I think it's a restaurant, Olivia's. That's proceeds that would come from the sale of that property, and then $1 million that Gloucester Volunteer Fire and Rescue has in hand, cash in hand. So that's $1.9 million of one-time dollars only assumed to occur in 24. So column G is just adding all of those columns to the left up, B, C, D, and F. That's the revenues associated with this capital plan. And then H and I is what has to be paid based on current obligations. H is that existing county and school debt that's not eligible for sales tax. That's known, it's set, it's fixed, and you can see that it's generally declining over time, right? The York County radio leases, there's about $700,000 a year for the next 4 years, and then it steps down to $500,000, and it's completed in 2033. I think that is attributable to 2 separate lease agreements. Column J is blank for now. We'll fill that in later when we talk about our plan, or scenarios, I should say. So column K is just simply adding up H and I. What you need to look at is column L. All right, column L here is just simply saying, what are our revenues under G compared to our obligations under K, and are we positive or negative in any given year? And right now, just with the existing obligations, you're positive every year. $1,400,000, $200,000, $200,000, $200,000, then it steps up, $900,000, $1,200,000, $1,600,000, and so on. And what we're doing is we're accumulating those over in the far right column. The concept here would be, within this capital plan, that if there are surpluses in any given year, that we set those aside in a capital reserve fund for future use. And that will require, year by year budgeting discipline by this board and future boards to do that. But that will be an important part of this plan. In other words, we're not proposing that these dollars get rolled into some other part of your budget, right? Because there's a lot going on that this is not captured. We're not modeling up anything related to your operating budget. This is just the capital and the debt. So for now, annual surpluses are being accumulated in column M. That's really sort of the key to how the budgeting process is set up for your current debt. Any questions on that? Okay. So we've set up some scenarios of a potential bond referendum. We're basically looking at a 10-year plan. We are assuming that if there were to be a referendum, that it would occur this coming November. I think your county attorney knows all of the deadlines and time frames that need to occur to position you to do that. Within the scenarios that we're going to run, as I mentioned earlier, we've got those one-time dollars, $1.9 million in FY24. Those are not ongoing, they're one-time, so we've got those in there. And the way we set this up, we've essentially said, let's model in our scenarios the ability to fund the 2 volunteer fire and rescue squad projects first. The Gloucester Volunteer Fire and Rescue Squad at $11 million. We've added a 10% contingency in talking with staff. So we are actually working with a cost on that one of about $12.1 million. And then at Abingdon, $1 million plus a 10% contingency at $1.1 million. So within each of our scenarios, we're going to fund that $13.2 million specifically for those 2 projects. And then from there, the model is just going to tell us or show us when is the next opportunity to issue debt within the 10-year time frame that the cash flows can support. So specifically, the 2 fire and rescue projects right up front, as soon as we're able to demonstrate they can be done, and then you'll see what the model has done is it just simply tells you in what future years how much you can borrow within the confines of the model. We are not modeling up any of those other projects. So we're not making any assumptions that project 8 gets funded before 7 or 6 before 9. It's just generic borrowing amounts that you all can consider in compared to the list of projects that are out there and begin to understand which of these scenarios can allow you to fund various projects. We've looked at 3 scenarios. Case A is we're only going to use the current revenues that I just stepped through a couple of slides ago. We're not adding any new revenue into the model. Case B assumes that we have all of the existing revenues in our model plus additional annual revenues beginning in FY25 of $582,000. That happens to be roughly what 1 penny on the real estate tax rate generates now, but no guarantee that a penny will generate that amount of revenue going forward. Could be more, could be less, so we've kept it to a more generic topic of conversation here, or description, I should say, which is another $582,000 of annual revenue committed to this plan. What does that do? And then case C, 1.1 million a year. Today, that's equal to 2 pennies on the tax rate. Going forward, we don't know, so we just said 1.16 million a year going forward. Our debt assumptions are pretty straightforward. For the first 2 projects, the fire and rescue, we're assuming that it's an interest-only loan for 2 years during construction and a total term of 25 years at 5%. It would be a fixed rate, it would be a tax-exempt borrowing, but you would have interest only during construction, and then you would begin principal and interest payments, and the total loan would go out 25 years at 5%. Today, you're going to be, maybe closer to 4% on that borrowing. So there's a little bit of cushion in there. And then all the other capacities that we back into, we're assuming 20 years at 5%, so a little bit shorter at the same 5% rate. Any questions on those cases? So this is really where it all comes together. And I'll go down case A, no additional revenues, just the revenues that are currently running through your budget. The 4.36 million of annual county revenues, the $1.9 million in FY24. And then what you can see is that case, we are able to fund the 2 fire and rescue squad projects in the fall of '24. So that would be about a year after a referendum, if you have a referendum. And then we can't demonstrate any additional capacity or affordability until fiscal year '25, where there's about 1.1 million. Then again in '28, where there's 2.3, keep going, '29, a little over 5 million, 7 million in 31, 7.5 million in 33. So case A, in its entirety, we're funding over that 10-year period about $36.8 million of debt, 13.5 of which is for the 2 fire and rescue projects. So I think something that Maria mentioned is, this isn't all assumed to be issued at one time, and if there is a referendum and it's approved, this board or future boards will decide each time, do we want to do additional debt, and if so, for what? There's a referendum that gets approved, but that in and of itself does not guarantee that the debt gets issued. The then sitting board has to approve any issuance of debt, even if the referendum was approved. So there's still that local action, debt issue by debt issue, that has to be done. And then you look at column B. The only thing we've changed is we've added that additional $582,000 a year of revenue. So it is another revenue source getting pulled into the model for sure. And what you'll see is it allows us there on lines 11 and 12 to do the fire and rescue borrowings a little earlier. Rather than the fall of '24, we can do them in the spring of '24, so about 6 months earlier. And then you'll see that we have additional capacity or affordability within the model, '24, fiscal '28, '29, '31, and '33. All in, that case, we're funding about 44.1 million of projects, including fire and rescue. And then finally, case 3, or C, 2 pennies or $1.1 million worth of revenue. We're able to do the fire and rescue in the spring of '24, and over this 10-year period, there's about $51 million worth of debt that could be issued. Okay? And graphically, you can see, with your existing debt, that red line, remember, that's basically $5.2 million a year. And under our case A, we stay under that red line. We're not going above it. Under case B and C, we do go above it, but we're also assuming in those cases that you bring in some additional revenue for the model.
The 2 pennies, the pennies.
Pardon?
The pennies on the taxes.
That's
what the assumption is.
1 penny or 2 pennies.
Right.
Others would prefer to call it 580,000 or $1.1 million, whichever one you like.
Well, taxpayer says 1 penny, 2 penny, it's important to them.
Understood. We got a couple different feedbacks on that one in our one-on-one meetings. This is the list of projects that county staff has put together, and you'll see that there's a base value or cost for each project in 2024 dollars. There's a 10% contingency that could be added, just to add some conservatism, I guess, to the estimate, knowing that all of these would need to be bid. And then as you go out and to the right, different years where the project could be funded or built or committed to, we've added a growth factor there of 2.6% per year. That's something we had talked through with staff, just trying to identify and capture the potential of continued inflation. And again, the models we just stepped through are only assuming that projects 1 and 2 get funded. The rest of the debt is not tied to any one project or another, that we're not making any sort of decisions or assessments of which projects should come third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. And then there are details for each of the three cases beginning on page 10. If there's any desire to look back at those, you can see, for example, on page 10 is case A. The only thing that's changed here is we've got the new debt that is running through case A in column J. That's new debt service commensurate with the debt capacity that model solves for, and again, that's about $36 million over the next 10 years. So that's new debt service in column J. And our check that this works under this baseline assumptions is that column M as in Michael never goes negative. Right? So you might have some years where you've got some shortfalls from these revenue sources, right? Column L does have some negative years. But remember, if there's a plan and a discipline to it, we pull over any surpluses, and those are available in subsequent years to supplement the debt budget. And our check here is that M as in Michael doesn't go negative. But it's got to be part of the budgeting mechanism going forward if this were to be the plan that adopted, that $1.4 million has got to be set aside and kept within this part of the budget. And the same goes true for 11 and 12, pages 11 and 12. Here, we've layered in the new debt in J. We've also layered in the new revenue that's associated. So in case B, column E is that 1 penny or $582,000 of additional revenue started in FY25, allows you to do more within the model, and the $1.1 million on page 12, or 2 pennies, allows you to do that much more. But same basic setup across all three cases.
Question.
Yes.
So, as we spoke during our 2-on-1, I know, I continue to notice on column B, you're assuming that the local transfer is going to remain the same, and you haven't decremented it for any potential risk that may come in of us being able to make that 4.4 million every year. Why did we not show another scenario which show perhaps a 2% or 3% reduction going forward?
Staff has the model that will allow them to decrease that annual revenue or increase it. We need some guidance on what you'd like to see.
I sent a spreadsheet over to you this weekend that has there's a column in it for a growth rate that you can put in positive or negative.
Thank you. I haven't seen it yet.
Yep,
Thank
no
you.
worries.
Thank you.
That's all we had. Is there any questions?
Not yet. If you could just hang tight a few minutes.
Absolutely.
I think, right there, stop.
Yeah.
Nope. There. I think where we need to start as a board is before we determine which we might be interested in doing, we need to figure out what projects we're interested in funding. And then that way we could go back and say when we could do it the other way. So, based on what everybody's said or heard, is that 1 and 2 are definitely in. Okay. Where are we after that, guys?
Mr.
Hedrick.
Mr. Hedrick.
As far as the sports complex is concerned, thank you for your input on that, Mr. Bazzani. I was uncomfortable about that, not because I'm opposed to it, but simply because I don't know enough about what needs to be done. And So I would like more information on that, perhaps maybe a tour or whatever.
We can get a tour, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's worthwhile to take that tour.
Yeah.
Is,
Today.
Mr. Hartley, do you have any more information on that before a tour?
I can, as far as scope's concerned.
Yes, sir.
We did share that with, good evening, by the way, we did share that with Mrs. Steele earlier today. But some of the work would include the field house, the weight room, the locker room, all needs to be renovated, some ADA, some compliance issues. In general, from a safety aspect, what we would like to do for a sports complex altogether was be able to kind of funnel everybody into a central gate or, maybe 2 gates, and they get into the complex. Right now, we currently don't have any way to filter through people going to baseball fields or to the field hockey field. So we really have a complex concept in mind. So there's some fencing and improvements for access, ADA issues. Part of it would be a conversion from a turf field to a synthetic turf field. Track needs to be resurfaced. We're looking at regrading because of safety issues, the baseball field, and relocating, so we can make all these things kind of fit in and work kind of in conjunction with any site work we might be able to get with the current high school renovation. Same thing with the softball field and the tennis courts, also looking at potential relocation of those, but the tennis courts actually have to be completely pulled up. We just can't resurface them anymore. And one speaker did speak about the pickleball concept, and there's a way to actually put some pickleball courts and maintain the integrity of our tennis courts. So,
Mr. Bazzani.
Yeah, I appreciate the tour we got today. One of the questions I asked Mr. Records today was the synthetic ball field. I called some of the vendors who do the NFL stadiums, and they indicated to me that synthetic fields in the sun that are continuously exposed to the sun can last about 12 years. Those synthetic fields that are indoors, in an indoor stadium, last about 15 years before they need to be replaced. So we talked about a cost-benefit analysis. We talked about how much it costs to maintain the field, and I did a quick back-of-the-envelope calculation, and it looks like to me while it would be slightly more expensive to go synthetic because we have to replace it in 12 years, it's about the same. The internal rate of return is low, but it's a negative rate of return. But still, with most other schools going synthetic, that might be a way to go for the sports complex. Me personally, gentlemen, I don't see throwing any more money into Woodville. I mean, Woodville's being renovated now with what they're doing on the larger field. I just don't see pouring money into Woodville Park. I don't see pouring money into water and sewer going to Woodville Park. That to me is just going to enrich any property owner that lives adjacent to Woodville. So for me, if we were going to do the next step, I think, and the ADA requirements and all the things they talked about, those buildings are dilapidated. They need to be renovated or augmented in such a way that they can be used at the complex. And the entranceway is just, the entranceway is convoluted. I don't know why they didn't design it that way. There's propane tanks right in the front. They got to be, they got to be moved out of the way so that you can get one entrance in. So, at first I went in skeptical of what you guys were looking for, but after the tour and talking to Mr. Records, I'm comfortable with the projects that you guys want to do with that sports complex. So that for me would be my second choice other than fire and rescue. Thank you.
Regarding the artificial turf, I was at a meeting with Mr. Miller, who was at that time your field hockey coach, and he brought in a gentleman that showed us a number of different types of artificial turf.
Right.
Some were more expensive than others. Some would last longer than others. I'm not sure if that has been blended into the proposal as to the type of artificial turf. I mean, I was really surprised at all the different types of turf. It blew my mind.
There's a lot out there, and we've exploring multi-use turfs. We've done what I would say at this point was probably kind of like network research. Talk to people that have these things. Our architects and site developers have put us in contact with people we can go do visits with. Really, and that since turf has been brought up, if I may add, there's, you know, a safety issue with it as well, because the turf field can get tore up and, you know, cause, you know, slip hazards and things like that. And really, one of our big concerns with our current field is recovery time, and we have a lot of organizations that would like to use our fields, and the priority really has to be for our in-season sports and our school activities first. But it would kind of be a neat concept if we had a field that did not require recovery time and will allow us to allow other organizations that we can go into contract with to use our field and bring community members out to the stadium. So there's a lot of potential with that, and I will add a couple things. When I came to Gloucester in 1997, that stadium was fairly new, and I think a lot of people were looking at us, but it's, you know, got 26 years of age since I've come. And also add just having a child that participated in sports and actually, you know, had competitions on a synthetic field. You know, it would rain till like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You'd think there'd be no soccer game that day, but sure enough, at 5 o'clock, they're playing soccer on that field. So there are some benefits to it. As Mr. Bazzani said, you know, you could compare those things, but, you know, when it's heavy in the sports season, we have boys and girls soccer, you know, at the stadium field. We have a baseball game going on, a softball game going on. You know, the one dedicated person, we have the Gloucester High School. It's a lot for them to handle, and we have to bring our other grounds crews over there to help assist.
A couple of things regarding the sports complex. One thing we should acknowledge is the Board of Supervisors that provided funds for the building of that complex many, many years ago, in addition to money that was allocated to improve or to add a gymnasium to Body Tot. And I know that personally because I was intimately involved in that entire process. And it was pretty neat, but the Board of Supervisors were really fantastic in supporting that project in total. And it turned out to be a pretty nice project, but you're right, 20 years of abuse. But regarding that facility, am I to understand that we would open it up to the public to use for walking and like on the track? Is that something that?
So, yeah, if I may speak to that just for a moment. And certainly I want to be cautious in my response. It's a school first, so we can't have public coming in during school hours, and then the priority goes to in-season sports and our clubs and activities. But we do have, you know, a good working agreement with Parks and Rec, which is a county entity. They use our fields for certain things, and, you know, they might be over there for t-ball practice on a new softball field or a new practice field, and a parent could certainly go and use the track. You heard us mention a little bit about having pickleball lines on a tennis court. So entering into that, we have some of those things in mind. I just want to make sure that we're clear on school hours first, making sure that we are able to enter into agreement with some of these other organizations that we currently don't have use agreements with.
I think it would be nice, you know, if, you know, we move forward with this project, that the public could know that they would have access at some points in time. You know, not all the time, obviously, because of the heavy use and, you know, for all the sports. But I know we've had inquiries in the past of, you know, why can't people do that? So, yeah, so I'm finished with that. But point of clarification for Mr. Bazzani. Mr. Baines, regarding the water and sewer line, it's my understanding that would be a single line that no one would be able to bleed into it. Sort of like the line that comes in from Matthews County. I mean,
So on the water system's going to be a local water system on site. So it'll be wells with a storage tank there that'll have the capacity to do the bathrooms,
Okay.
the building like Wickham Lodge, and our maintenance facility. The sewer going down there is what we call that low pressure. That is much like you're talking about to Matthews, where it's a
County,
restricted amount that you can put into it, that we would have, instead of putting in a line that would take the capacity of all homes down there, you put in a much smaller pipe. And there's two alternatives when we get up to 17. One's to build a pump station that then could push it at high pressure into the force main that's along 17, or we just go under 17, and right there at Bedford Falls, there's a pump station there that we could discharge into. So it would be a small pipe, low pressure that we could push all the way up. So that's how we got the cost down so much from doing that versus trying to develop something that would be an interceptor main for all homes down there.
and I think it's the same thing, the line that, just as a comparison, the one that they're going to put into Saluda, or not Saluda, but isn't that the similar thing that we're not going to be able to link into it because it's coming under the Piankatank River?
Where our our county attorney, one of the things they've got to do is they've got to create a service slot here in the county to add another booster pump stations. We've had Mr. Dawson talking to HRSD about renegotiating the agreement with us, but at one time it was that all that would come through Gloucester from the courthouse to Matthews was Matthews sewage. Now that they're going to try to do Middlesex, we're trying to discuss with them, what does that mean to Gloucester County? Maybe a couple of other additions like Brown Park, or maybe something down towards Perrin. We're trying to talk to them about that right now. When our county attorney gets back, we'll spend some time on doing that. But yes, sir, right now that line is still so small for us to have connections in Gloucester on that line. We can't discharge directly into it.
Right, so regardless of the issue, it would be impossible for anyone to link in. We wouldn't let them, period, because
It's possible.
Yeah, almost anywhere is possible, but the amount of money it would cost and the things you'd have to do, but it wouldn't be set up so that anybody along there would just put a gravity sewer in and tie into that line.
okay, no, fair enough.
And just for a point of clarification, we've been talking to Mr. Hartley about your wishes of that facility, if we work on the sports facility, try to have it open to as many people as possible. So we've talked about walking trails or the track if it's not being used when parents are there watching other sports. The whole idea of this area being kind of funneled in so that there's a better safety of all the fields there is kind of critical. And having a turf field, as he said, will allow you to have an opportunity to have other groups come in and use it during a season like football season or soccer season, because we won't have the wear and tear in the recovery. So it may be exciting to see some of those other groups that are part of regional competitions like the girls field hockey that go over to CNU, maybe have a tournament here, or the soccer or the football could play in there also and have an agreement with the schools. But we're working on that so they understand that your hope is that there is some additional use to it besides just the schools.
So back to the sewer, the incremental cost of going from a 2-inch pipe to, let's say, a 5-inch pipe,
Right.
the cost of the pipe is, the differential there is almost negligible. It's the cost of digging the trench and burying that
Yes,
pipe.
sir.
That's where the bulk of the cost is.
Yes,
So
sir.
if you're going to put a 2-inch pipe in there, you might as well just go ahead and put the 5-inch pipe in there and get it over with. But again, we do that, that's going to open up all the adjacent properties. The properties are going to be evaluated, they're going to be making a fortune because of the fact that a lot of those properties don't perk, and now they will be serviced by sewer. And so Woodville can wait. There's no emergency at Woodville, right? The sports complex, I looked at it today. I was skeptical. I looked at it and I said, with a jaundiced eye. And after I looked at it, I said, my gosh, this place needs to be renovated. If we're going to spend $9.4 million at Woodville, let's not do that. Let's spend it on the sports complex. And that's where I'm going with this.
Mr. Hedrick, you had something earlier? Okay. Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. For me, first of all, first and second choices would be the fire department, most definitely. Sports complex, next, as long as the citizens know that they're not going to be completely shut out.
Correct.
I mean, that's the way they feel now. I mean, they used to, as you know, they used to do the Relay for Life there, and they put in a new track, and they got cut off, and they couldn't do it anymore because the new track was put in. And then Woodville, I totally disagree with not doing anything to Woodville. I mean, I was there this year because my grandson plays soccer, and they did their closeout there this year because he does Baystar, but they did the closeout out there in that Woodville. Every field was full. One porta potty here, one porta potty there. Very unsanitary. You come out, when you come out of, you're going in the porta potty, you're coming out, people in line waiting, no way to even wash your hands. You need water and you need sewer in Woodville. And not only that, I think, if I'm correct, once the lights and all are put in, it'll be opened up for baseball and football. And it's a lot of kids in this community and that are not be able to go to the sports complex that do a lot of sports at Woodville. Woodville is a busy place. I don't know if anybody been there except me have you ever been there on the weekend when they have sports? Woodville is busy. So to ignore Woodville, it just wouldn't make sense to me to, ignore.
Mr. Chriscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Looking at the list that was provided, and hearing some of my colleagues' comments, you know, I'm very much in favor of dealing with the issues that we have that we need to get addressed at both of our volunteer fire departments. Then looking at that, when the school item came to us this year, I believe, I think it was the first, maybe last year they brought it to us about doing stuff at the complex. So I'm looking here, we've got about $22 million in projects sounding like what this board is in favor of right now to get done as quickly as possible. The rest of these projects outside of the HVAC at Body Tot Achilles, Petsworth, athletic field lighting for Woodville, Gloucester Point beach renovations, and then Brown Park expansion. Everything else on this list has not gone through our scoring process that we use each year when determining our capital improvement plan, including the items that everybody here seems to be in favor of getting done first. You know, I think that we can get those projects done. And I know I'm jumping the gun here, but at the same time, the other projects that have not been scored, I think we need to look at doing the best thing for the county, which is allowing the citizens to have a say. But I think we should limit it to not looking at doing an increase in the revenue through taxation when we look at those bonds. Because with what I'm currently seeing with the version A, we'd have the ability to borrow about 37 million. So then we could get done the three items that everybody has mentioned already, and then have an additional about $16 million to take care of the other projects once they get scored and brought back to us during the budget cycle for next year.
And Mr. Chriscoe, you understand that we try our hardest to find other grants and things to find additional funding where we can.
Yeah, and that may be true for the beach projects with the, you know, the upcoming celebration that, you know, could afford that. But I'm talking about the other projects. For example, Mr. Baines mentioned grants and whatever. So the beach projects, you know, with the celebration coming up, we might be able to get money, grants for that, given the place where Gloucester is and what we are in the history of this country. But I like the risk management page that they put together, because I think it highlights the issues that I have been thinking about the whole time, is that it doesn't anticipate any additional revenue. You know, we may have some, but we don't know. I think this board has been very conservative. I mean, look, we're all fiscally conservative in the way we handle our budgets, and we do our best to make sure that the budgets that we approve are fair and equitable for the county citizens. And I think that, as Mr. Chriscoe said, there are lots of projects that we'd like to do, but they haven't gone through the vetting process. That would be the purview of future boards. You know, we don't have to do them all at once, but I think we've all agreed that, you know, we want to do the very best for the fire and rescue squads. And the sooner we do it, the sooner they get this building built. And remember that the sale of their facility isn't accounted in this scenario. I like to see this move forward as quickly as possible for the fire and rescue, because we know they're already putting money to keep that facility current. The sooner we can get this new building built, fill it for them, that means less money they have to deal with in their own facility. So that's why I think, you know, moving quickly for those two projects are paramount to me. You know, we all know, and we've spoken how many times, how important the fire and rescue squad is to this county. And we've all done our very best to support it day in, day out. I think this would be a wonderful tribute to support this for the fire and rescue and get it done, you know, for both squads. You know, we're very fortunate to have a great volunteer fire and rescue. We do have some paid people, but, you know, they're a great group, and to do something like that, I think, would show a lot of support for this great group of people.
One reason that some of these items were not scored for capital improvements is this year they changed everything around to only score items that were in the first year of funding. That's why the other items haven't been scored.
Yes, sir. We tried a new program to try to make it a little more streamlined in the numbers, so we did just the ones we thought would be priority for next year. But we can certainly go back, Mr. Chriscoe, and make sure we have them all ranked so that we do a better job with that.
Mr. Hedrick.
Specific to the body tot renovation at about $4 million, that's been on the CIP, as I recall, for a considerable length of time. Am I correct in that?
It's only been a couple of years.
It's been on the last two CIP cycles, so the 23 to 27 and the 24 to 28 cycle.
Yeah. Now, to me, if I were to score any, this would come to the top of the list right after the fire department. We're speaking education, so if we do fire department, if we do the sports complex, if we do body tot, we're squeezing this thing together to where we need more revenue to get more of this done as soon as possible. I think this is a reasonable list in its totality, and I support trying to do that as soon as possible.
Mr. Gibson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Hedrick, I just want to make sure I understand. Are you you feel all 12 projects are reasonable in their totality? Is that your position?
Yes.
Okay. Just some of my thoughts on what has been discussed tonight, and I appreciate the citizen comments tonight about the Constitution, because I do believe that is absolutely our foundation, our guiding principles that we should follow. And the U.S. Constitution starts off the preamble with "We the people." And in thinking back over the almost 2 years I've been on the board, we've heard a lot from the people, and that's a good thing. We have citizen comment periods, we have town halls, we have emails and letters we receive from citizens, and what we have heard from the people, in my opinion, are in 3 different areas. And first is public safety. We've heard from the hardworking men and women of the Volunteer Fire and Rescue that they need a new fire station, they need a new bunkhouse in Abingdon, and I agree 100% that these projects need to be funded as soon as possible for many reasons. One, they need this to meet the demands of a growing community. Our population continues to increase. Your number of calls continue to increase, and we're also struggling with recruitment. And just like in the football recruiting world, if you keep up with that, it's always the latest and greatest facilities that attract the best recruits. Well, if we have a new fire station and a new bunkhouse, that's going to be more attractive to younger folks who are ready to jump in and serve our community. So I agree with everyone that this is one of our top priorities, that we've got to maintain our public safety and support our volunteer fire and rescue. We also need to support our schools. That's what we're also hearing from our families and citizens of all ages. It's not just those who have children, but it's the schools that provide the workforce for the future. I appreciate, Mr. Bazzani, that you went out on that tour today to get a first-hand look. I've seen a first-hand look, and I agree that it's much needed. Many of those fields and courts are dangerous, frankly, to the student-athletes. They're just in such a horrible condition that this is a huge need. And, you know, somebody might be out there thinking, well, what's in it for me? I don't have kids in school. But when you look at the big scheme of things, when a nurse or maybe a law enforcement officer who's looking at maybe becoming a school resource officer looks at our county, or maybe a doctor, and they come and tour Gloucester High School and see weeds growing out of the tennis court and a baseball field that you're going to trip over the field, they're going to say, you know what, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so this all works hand in hand with not only attracting the right people who want to work here, but also a company that might look on Route 17 at that piece of land. What are we investing in our schools? And if we want to be fiscally responsible, we want to build when we have the bulldozers out there. We want to continue to do that. So I would support that, as well as the renovations to Botetourt. And lastly, regarding Parks and Rec, I think we're missing a real opportunity with Woodville if we don't move forward with these proposals, because it is heavily used now. We've already invested almost $1 million to upgrade these fields. And when you look at the money and the interest in the tournament soccer tournaments, football 7-on-7 tournaments, you are attracting huge numbers of people. If we were to improve Woodville to that facility, they're going to stay in our hotels, they're going to eat at our restaurants. And maybe some of those folks who are bringing their kids here can say, you know what, I'd rather settle in Gloucester County. I'd rather serve at the hospital or at the school system or as a law enforcement officer or in the volunteer fire and rescue. It works hand in hand with economic development. Nobody's mentioned it yet, but I think we're also missing a huge opportunity if we don't develop Gloucester Point Beach Park. We could have an amphitheater there, we could have festivals, we could have music, and it could be a real draw for our own community, give waterfront access. So I think it's time for we, the people, to vote on whether they want these projects, because I hear these needs being expressed all the time. Let's give the people an opportunity to vote on these.
I agree with that.
Mr. Hedrick? Oh, stay away from the mic then. I think you're getting ready to talk.
Keeping you on your toes.
Gosh.
So, Mr. Chair,
Dr. Orth.
Mr. Chair,
Dr. Orth.
Mr. Chair,
Dr. Orth.
what's your next move on this one?
Well, I think where I was on this one, I think it was senseless to, and you can sit down if you want.
You know, sit down, but he looks so good up there. I was just going to let him stand there a little longer and sweat.
He did look comfortable.
And, you know, he is our acting superintendent until August 1st, so we really appreciate him taking the step up here to try to keep all this going while they were looking for a new
I was getting ready
superintendent.
to say, Dr. Clements hadn't been gone very long, and he's already jumped in his spot.
Yeah, absolutely.
My thought process was to let, initially, let Mr. Cole present the different scenarios to us, as he's done in the past. But after reviewing what we've gotten, I felt it was more important that we had an idea and move it a step forward and look at the projects to where we were thinking. So as a board, we need to figure out what projects we truly want to do of these initially. Because as we've said, if we do a referendum, then it will be determined, the citizens will determine what they do. After we determine which we feel they need to be, that's when we would come back and say, as a referendum point of view, it needs to be at the 1 cent or the 500,000 or the 2 cent or the 1,100 or 1.1. So we need to figure out where we're looking at, or we also have a scenario at 1.5 cents, and I don't know what that is, 700 and something thousand to break it out. But my point is, we need to look at the projects as they are and say, okay, this is the ones we're interested in. How can we achieve that goal?
I would add to that, Mr. Chair, I would be amenable to doing the projects that Mr. Chriscoe had mentioned without having to raise a penny in taxes. We've got enough borrowing capacity to do a significant portion of these projects without raising taxes.
Okay, then which, if we were to do that?
It's hard to say right now, because we haven't scored them yet, so.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Steele had put in there in page 30 and 31 some suggested spending plans. You can kind of see what the cost would be and what you would have in different scenarios. There, obviously, y'all could pick whatever you want, but on 2 pages, she had put down several scenarios. And you have it as a handout now, but
Right.
that's what pages 30 and 31.
It's the one with the yellow.
Right.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been thinking about with regard to the referendum is what's the greatest, how do we guarantee that we get the citizens to vote for these particular projects? Because obviously, you know, we really want to support Gloucester Fire and Rescue and Abingdon Volunteer and Rescue. they see that as something that benefits the entire community. If we mention other projects that they may not like, because again, they're voters, do we jeopardize those two top projects if we put other projects in there that we may see coming online down the pipe? I'd like to think that we put together, an appropriate document for referendum that guarantees the success that we get the money for Abingdon and Gloucester's.
Well, when I look at this, I don't see an item on here that doesn't benefit every citizen of the county. I mean, I think from the time that the three of us have been on the board, we've always had the senior center that was in the millions and millions of dollars. It's still on the CIP, but it'll never be funded as it is. So, I mean, if you truly look at it that way, in my opinion, these are all items that affect everyone in the county. Mr. Chriscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just looking at the sheet here and knowing that this entire borrowing is not going to happen at once. Right. Mm-hmm. So any path that we take, whether we put forth a referendum that has zero increase, a 1 cent or $582,000 increase, or a 2 cent, or whatever the number is, it could be $1 million cents. The issue comes back to affordability. Can we afford it? Lieutenant Governor Sears said something yesterday about crystal ball. Someone was looking at a pool ball instead of a crystal ball because the numbers just weren't working. So how do we, I don't have the comfort in going forward with where we have been the last 2 years economically to feel favorable that things will continue and our 1 cent will continue to be $582,000 per penny. I don't have the comfort that I need to think that's going to be the right number. I don't have the comfort in knowing that we're going to be able to meet the need and able to fund that $4.3 million that we obviously have a model that says we can, but I don't know where we're going to go. You go back to 2007, 2008, everyone's going along, this is great, boom, and everything's nothing. Everybody's pulling money back. The schools, several years later than that, they cut 20 days out of their budget, out of their school year to make their ends meet. I don't want to be in that scenario, and I don't want to handcuff our citizens in doing that. If you look at the option 1, no tax increase, that's both fire departments starting on the beach, doing some of the sports complex, and doing things at Woodville and everything. It's right there. To me, those things are we don't get the ball field lights at Woodville. We don't get all of the school HVACs, which with some of the renovations that we have going on and efficiencies, we could make some other money up somewhere. I just don't have the faith in our economy to think that we're going to weather this storm effectively enough by burdening the taxpayers any more than leaving it as a 36, I've got my pages all mixed up here, 36 or so $1 million borrowing with a referendum with no tax increase. That's where I'm going to be comfortable. If anything else is proposed, I will vote against it, not against anybody, but I think we have enough money and things available to accomplish a lot of these things without overburdening our citizens.
So, Mr. Chriscoe, do I understand that you would be willing to support case A because it would involve no tax increase? And I agree that there are a lot of unknowns with regard to our economy. I mean, we all read different things that say one thing or the other. Things have been very interesting since the COVID hit, and then the response to recovery of COVID. I will say this, that I would be willing to support the referendum with no tax increase at present because of the unknowns. And I think it would be really good for the board to be unanimous in this particular referendum. I think it would send a strong message to the citizens if we could come up with a unanimous vote. I mean, I know some people may want to support the other projects, but I think we need to be careful. And again, when I look at the risk management that was set up by the staff, I think it sets the rules for watching what happens with the economy in successive years. We don't know.
Well, Dr. Orth, I think with what's presented in all of these cases, whether it be option 1 through 4, it's all dependent upon what we can do. If you remember what happened in March of 2000 or 2020, we just passed the budget, and what happened? We put everything on hold because we didn't know what was going to happen. So regardless of what option is chosen, I think we need to look at it and say, okay, well, if the economy hits a downturn, we're not going to do it. We've got to do, it's all future borrowing. But I think if you look at it, it needs to be at a point where you can get done what we have, what we can get done. Mr. Chriscoe.
You know, Mr. Hedrick said he thought all of these projects were important, and they are, or else they wouldn't be on our capital improvement plan. Unfortunately, you know, there's not enough money ever to fund all of these things. And I think we are taking appropriate steps to get some more of these things knocked off our list. You know, Dr. Orth mentioned that we all read varying things, and you know, I'm starting to feel pretty good because most of the people that I follow are starting to say that, you know, the deeper recession that they thought was coming, they don't see it being as bad as they had first thought. They think it's going to lessen. But those are also the same people that 3 months ago said it's going to be worse than 2008 and everything else. So I don't put a whole lot of a stake in what they say until something happens. In the grand scheme of things, I will say that I think that moving forward with this, with option A, gives us roughly $15 million in borrowing potential at a later date, where we can prioritize these items outside of the renovations or the new fire departments, the renovation at Abingdon, and the schools. We have money there left to determine what we want to do with and make a good dent on this. And then if you look forward, you know, our capacity, we'll have additional funds available with Case A starting by 2035, 2036, decent amounts of money to make bigger holes in some of this stuff.
So I would agree with, Mr. Chair. I would agree with Mr. Chriscoe and Dr. Orth's premises that, yeah, we can do option A with no tax increase, but if we take the borrowing and incrementally take the borrows, not at once, well, fire and rescue, just take these two projects, and then, I'm like Mr. Chriscoe, you know, in 2008, I lost 45% of my 401k when the dot-com thing, because I was heavily invested in some of those companies. Just don't know what's going to happen in the future. The federal government wants to put in more stimulus again. They're talking about providing another stimulus to the citizens for whatever reason. I don't understand. When you inject more money into the economy, that increases more demand for goods and services, and when you have more, it's just simple economics 101. More demand for goods and services is going to cost more. And that's probably the main cause for the inflation we're seeing right now, because of the amounts of money that the government's printing as a result of all the stimulus that we got. So I'm on a very take it easy approach. Option 1, you know, no tax increase, that's what I would support in this case. To just go out and do everything is just unreasonable to me. It's not fair to the taxpayer to do that to them.
Mr. Chriscoe.
And just piggybacking here on what Mr. Bazzani just said, option A doesn't even guarantee no tax increase. It just means that the known revenue increase does not need to be there. We know all of the variables that we can control with using option A. Option B and option C, we know that we're going to have to infuse additional money from the taxpayer. It's already known, and those values, while they are what they are, aren't necessarily what it'll end up being.
Well, the one thing we do know is that prices are going to go up. Mr. Gibson.
I would completely agree, Mr. Chair. The one constant that we absolutely know is the cost of every single one of these projects is going to go up and up and up. And my question to those who oppose taking on more projects is, if these projects are important, how are you going to pay for them? And can you identify what the cost this will be? In 2029, that would be the first spending for the sports complex. So for many years, there would be no spending. The current projected cost is $7.8 million. We learned with the high school when there was discussions before I was on the board about a new high school of certain much lower projections, but now here we are and the projections are through the roof and we could only renovate the high school instead of build a new high school. So the proposed costs are going to continue to rise, and so if we know that, may I ask, how will we pay for those in 2029, 2030, 2033?
I point to this document that it gives us a lot of flexibility, you know, in watching the economy over time, and that, you know, if things improve and we feel comfortable, we could do those things. But, you know, again, you know, no one has a crystal ball. We've asked the people from Davenport, you know, they don't want to put their foot in their mouth about what's going to happen in the economy. You know, Gloucester is going to grow. You know, we are going to probably see sales tax and meals tax and those taxes increase, but there's no guarantee that the penny that we talked about, which is $5.82, is going to be $5.82 more or less. And I think that the suggestion that we have here of being conservative, but then watching what happens every year. The board has the option of looking at all these projects every year and saying, okay, we can then move forward with something else. You know, I think that, you know, we need to be very careful because, again, there are a lot of citizens of this county that are barely making it, and we need to recognize that. We've talked about, you know, the people that, you know, are at risk of, you know, going under. And I think that the proposal of moving forward with, you know, no tax increase, even though I agree with the sports complex, and I agree with, I mean, I think we will have money to do something with the sports complex, but Woodville Park, I agree, it needs to be done. I think we should consider it a priority, but I think these other things in particular, with the fire and rescue, are to me, absolutely crucial.
Mr. Bazzani.
So the other consideration we should take is that, let's see, we got 5 months left before the election. You know, we may have a board that says, let's do a 4-cent tax increase. Let's do all these projects, you know, because some of us or all of us may be gone, and that's the end of that. So take one step at a time. You know, you don't know who's going to replace 3 chairs here next January. We don't know, and we don't know what their political ideology is going to be. We may not be conservative anymore like we thought we would be. So taking it one step at a time is what we should do. I still support the no tax version of this, but then looking at each of the projects carefully to see that we can, going forward, that we can afford those no tax projects, no increased tax projects in this case.
Mr. Gibson.
I agree, we need to be fiscally responsible. We need to be cautious. We need to take things year by year. But the mindset of never moving forward with faith, never moving forward with confidence, always saying, wait till next year, ends up costing us money repeatedly. Baseball field at Page. No, let's not build it. 5 years later, we build it. It costs 3 times as much money. Gym at Page. No, we don't need a big gym. We don't need room for stands. We don't need room for parents and students. We built a small gym. The students can't even play sports in that gym. They are bused over to Peasley Middle School, incurring wear and tear on our buses, wear and tear on our parents and students. we lose money again in perpetuity. Small amphitheater. We don't need a big amphitheater. We don't know what's going to happen in the future. We build a small amphitheater, a theater room. We have a promotion ceremony at Page Middle School. We have to do 3 separate promotion ceremonies because we don't have room for all the students and the parents, unlike at Peasley Middle School where we had the entire school there. That affects our quality of life. It affects our expenditures. And it sounds good in the short term, and in the long term we pay. And so you're all saying you want to do this sports complex, but we wouldn't even begin building until 2029. 2029. That's not fiscal responsibility. That's wasting money when we are already in the midst of a renovation of the high school.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chriscoe.
All right, so we're going to rewind everybody back to like 1993. In 1993, I played varsity baseball in Gloucester County. You know what I did for my 9 home games? I went and got in my personal car and drove to Page Middle School to play baseball games. Every home game I drove to myself. Every single one of them. Our football team was bused to Page Middle School to play their home football games. We have come a very, very long way. And back in '93, this community was growing thousands a year, not hundreds. So I understand that, you know, there's a long list of things that need to get done. There are also problems with affordability and what we're going to do to our tax base. I know some of these things will improve our tax base and have more people willing to come here. At the same time, there are projects on this list that I think could be done differently, maybe some grant funding, or shoot, if we make the right decision, a right company would locate here and maybe would write us a check for some of these things. I mean, Isle of Wight, those kind folks over there, they were in a quandary about how to improve their youth sports facilities. Well, luckily, their friends at Smithfield Food wrote them a big check. We don't have an industry here like that. All we have is the tax base. All we have is the folks that live here every day, with 70% of those folks leave Gloucester every day to go to work. And they spend money outside of this county on their way home sometimes, not all the time. So we are not capturing enough of our revenue because we lose so many people every day outside of our county to go to work. In a perfect world, we would be able to fund all of this and not even have to borrow money, but we're not in that situation. And I think with what we're looking at doing, we're going to provide our citizens with the essentials that they need to improve their quality of life. We will have an additional $15 million outside of the first 3 items, and we will be able to take a bigger bite out of this. These things would continue to be on the CIP if we weren't talking about doing a borrowing this year. That's why it's here. We rate them. Because of our new format, half of these weren't rated this year. And with our criteria, I don't know if I would be ready to do anything that didn't score over a 6 or a 6.5 on this currently with what we have, because of the money that we've had available. So I think making some more money available is key, but I don't like putting more burden on the backs of the taxpayer of Gloucester to get this done. I mean, I can't do this in my house. I can't just say, oh, I'm going to do it all, and I don't have the revenue to do it. I'm going to, borrow myself to the hilt, but you know what? The bank's never going to tell me what my limit is. But I don't see it being fiscally responsible to continue to burden the taxpayers each and every year.
So, Mr. Chair, can I?
Mr. Bazzani.
So, You know, I would like a nice C8 Corvette. I would like a new roof on my house. I would like a swimming pool on the back of my house. All those things are expensive, and if I wait, yeah, those will get more and more expensive every year. So we have to look and see, what can we afford? What can we afford given our current debt structure? What can we afford? And that's what we need to look at. I can't support doing all these projects at once, thinking that everything's going to be more expensive. Yeah, everything is going to be more expensive. That's just the law of economics and finance. It's going to be more expensive. If I put a roof in today, it's going to cost me 25 grand. 2 years from now, it might cost me 30 grand, just because things go up, right? Things go up. Inflation affects everybody. So I think it's prudent that we take option A, let the taxpayer decide whether option A is good for them. If it's not, then we have to sit there and come back and reevaluate all these projects again. So, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Hold on. If we're going to turn the clock back, we're going to go back to the early 80s. And Turnley Todd and Tommy Dutton, when they go over the page for the football games, in order to determine if the bleachers were safe, they jump on the board together, and if it didn't break, it was safe. We've come a long way in the county. So, I mean, to sit there and go with this, we need to look at what's best for the long term. We've been, on this board, the reason we're in the position we're in for a lot of this stuff is because we haven't been willing to make a decision. As I've said earlier, when we're looking at these items, we need to look at it as like a mortgage. And we buy what we can afford, but we get a mortgage and we pay for it over 30 years. If you're fortunate, you're going to pay for it over 15 years, but you're going to enjoy it throughout your life. You're not going to save all your life, get it up to the point where you can buy your house, and then you can't enjoy it. If you're looking at option one, I think you just need to make the commitment tonight to the fire department and say you're going to do it, and you don't need a referendum because we have that capacity. I think we need to look at it and let the citizens of the county determine what they want to do. I mean, we're sitting here, 7 people, trying to make a decision on what's best for the county. We're giving the county, and every citizen of this county, an opportunity to say, we want this, we want these different items. And that's the reason for the referendum.
So what happens if the referendum fails and we don't get to do any of it?
No, if the referendum
Takes 5 years. If it fails, you can't hold another referendum with the same language for 5 years.
With the same language. Mr. Chair, I
Mr. Smith.
totally agree with you, because all we're doing is going back and forth with the same thing. Let's just put this in a referendum and put it to the citizens. Let the citizens speak.
We still have to decide.
I know we have to decide.
Can I finish?
I know that.
But we still have to decide.
I haven't finished yet. Well, put it to the citizens. All we're doing is going back and forth with the same thing. Like Orth had said earlier, we all need to be united with this. How can we all be united with it? I don't expect to be united with everybody because we all have different opinions. So that's not going to happen. Let's just figure out what we're going to do. Put it to a referendum. Let the citizens speak.
Mr. Chriscoe.
That's fine. I support a referendum, but I will not support it for any other option other than A.
And excuse me, but A has no tax increase, so what would the citizens say? Hey, we're telling you as your representative that we can afford to do these things without impacting your pocketbook. So what would be the purpose of the referendum?
But you don't know that. You do not know that. There are citizens out here that want a sports complex. There are citizens out here that want to see Woodville upgraded, restrooms, water, sewer. They've been saying it for years.
But we're telling them that we can do this with option A.
But we can do everything but the ball field lights.
Right.
Mr. Hedrick.
I just want to point out that in regards to affordability, the analysis has said clearly that doing this is affordable. regardless of whether we go with A, B, or C, the county can afford to do this. And it keeps our debt at about half of what our standards are. So I'm in agreement with moving forward on the 2 cent and including all of these in the referendum, all of
Yes.
these. Thank you.
Dr.
Thank you.
Orth.
Ms. Callaway, I know it's kind of early, but do you have any indication how the overall budget did this coming past year in terms of our revenue for the different sources? Is it too early to tell? Or
Yeah,
do you have a kind of a general idea looking at the numbers? Just to give us a heads up on how our...
So unfortunately, the deadline just hit yesterday. So that's stretched things out a little bit to see, because generally about half of our revenue comes in on that June 30th deadline. So trending is very difficult with the deadline being pushed to Monday. So we just had our deadline, and at my last look, from what I can tell from the first half of real estate, we were looking very much on target with a little additional revenue in personal property, as we've reported before.
But we won't know about sales tax and meals tax until August, right? That's when all the businesses, get their numbers in, and then we start seeing the real.
Yeah, so the sales tax, sales tax comes in 2 months in arrears. So we will know in August what the June number was. However, I'll tell you that it's been tracking perfectly on budget. So, and lodging has actually been exceeding budget, and we know that 1 month in arrears. So we should be coming up on the 20th of this month for lodging and meals to get an idea on where we came with that. But we track those on a monthly basis, and they have all been fitting perfectly on a month-to-month basis, either at or above what we budgeted.
So even though we may not see numbers above the projection of what was done, it does mean, because you have increased the budget for each of those items, it does mean that this county is doing well.
Absolutely.
Right at this point in time.
The revenue, exactly. So we have, our goal with the projections is not to always come in over budget. Obviously, it's to come on right on target. So we have increased those projections specifically on the sales tax, meals tax, and lodging tax each year to ensure. Now this year, I think we did see a trend dip for lodging, and that was a little bit of uncertainty, but that's a very small amount. Sales specifically, we have increased significantly in the last several years, and it has continued to exceed that target.
So any personal investment advisor will tell you past history does not dictate what's going to happen in the future. And we can say, yeah, we're doing great, man. We're doing great, right? But past history doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to see the same thing in the future. Any investor worth their salt will know that's true. So you have to assess, what is the risk ahead of me? Charles Records did a great risk assessment with me today. He said he had a $5 billion contingency. He used about 100,000 of that contingency. So I said, well, that's good news. Maybe you might end up, giving some of that money and using it towards a sports complex or some other project you might want for the school system. He said, yeah, but that's only about we're only about 25% in. And, I've got 75% of the work ahead of me. And so I might just use all of that money. So I can't tell you today that I can give you that. Maybe in 2025 when the project's over and we see what's left over, I can tell you. So his point was, I can't tell you what the future's going to look like. I can't tell you what that's going to be. It may get more expensive. I asked him if there were change orders in the project. He said none. I asked Carol Steele for cost. He provides to the school board, he provides a monthly cost invoicing spreadsheet, PowerPoint, to each of the board members in the school. I'd like to see a copy of that. I want to see how much money we've spent, how much is left to pay, so that we get, as a board, see where is this project going? Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Are we going to see some money left over? Haven't seen that. I am not willing to spend, I'm not going to willing to subject taxpayers to a 2-cent tax increase simply because you say, I want to do every project on this list. That's just irresponsible. That's just unreasonable and irresponsible. And so I am not going to support any kind of tax increase. I will support option A, and that's where I stand, and I'll do that till I'm out of here.
Mr. Bazzani, just to make sure you know, in Carol's last weekly report, she sent you the actual spreadsheet with all the information for the schools and their spending.
Yes, we all got it.
It was in Friday's report.
It's in
It was-
Friday's
It was
report.
Friday, it just came in.
I'm
But,
sorry.
no, but
I
it's
apologize.
there.
Okay, if it's there, I apologize.
Yes, sir.
I'll look at it.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Gibson.
What is our deadline for approval? Is it the end of August?
No.
Like August 13th, 14th, 15th, somewhere in that frame.
Because it doesn't sound like we've reached any sort of consensus tonight, and it sounds like we may need to make a decision at the first August meeting.
I have to agree with you. I think that we need to regroup. I think Mr. Cole likes Gloucester a lot. He's eaten some good meals here. It's not that far from Richmond, so hey.
Mr. Chair, if, my understanding, George, correct me if I'm wrong, from Ms. Steele is we could begin with a little general direction. We could begin drafting a referendum if that would be helpful.
I'm not sure you can.
Okay. If not with the direction we have to this moment, but.
No, and obviously, I've heard a lot of different opinions tonight on what's going on. The one point in the things that Ms. Steele had made available was between option 1 and option 2, actually 2, you got everything done in a little faster time frame than 1 that you didn't get them all done. The other 2 options are you have money left over at the end of the 10 years so that you could have some money saved up for the next set of capital projects. But in doing it, that's why she tried to at least give you some ideas so you could kind of see from a budgeting standpoint that one of them we don't get it all done. The second one we seem to get everything done in the time frame of 10 years. The third one we have some funding available afterwards. And the last one we actually have a fair amount of funding available that you could look for things in the future. Like you said, as a board, y'all have got to kind of come to a consensus of where you want that to be.
So I think right now we need to determine as a group where we want to be. I know we've got different of opinions both ways. Some have said 2%, some have 2 cents, some have said no increase.
No sense.
No sense. Got that. So I think we need to talk amongst ourselves. Remember, you can't talk more than 3. Don't text one another. Call and talk and figure it out.
Mr. Chair, I think that the board is of a mindset that they're willing to consider a referendum. I do think we can have some sort of a framework so that we can finish this discussion so we don't have to start or schedule an additional meeting in August at the deadline to get this over the hurdle. I think there's enough information here that we can have our county attorney start with the referendum idea, because if we get to the August 1st meeting and there's nothing to decide on, we're gonna have to schedule an additional meeting to beat the deadline to get this on the ballot.
Well,
And honestly, I won't support anything other than that, but at the same point in time, I think it would be foolish for us not to have a referendum that goes, here are your options for your referendum. Option A, you get this amount of money. Option B, you get this amount of money with a 1 cent increase. Option C, you get this amount of money with a 2 cent increase for the projects that are listed. All of the orange projects that are listed, or the projects that are listed on page 8 of Davenport's thing. I don't see why we can't do that. Then we can determine if we go case A, we know the first 3 are off the top. I think between that and conversations that'll have to happen with McGuire Woods, I think that can be arranged. I mean, here we are, we only have
3 weeks.
a little over 2 weeks or so to get this flushed out, and I don't know if it can happen prior to the deadline we'd have to schedule a special meeting for anyway.
But, Mr. Cole, and I'm not, you've been more involved with referendums than we have. The problem with putting a referendum out with options 1, 2, 3, and 4, or A, B, C, D,
Right?
you're gonna have if you do it that way, you're gonna have more of a propensity for them to all fail. Because it's gonna be too confusing, because if somebody wants 4, they're gonna vote for 4. If somebody wants 1, they're gonna vote for 1. And am I correct that you're gonna probably not have a majority vote on any of them? Or would you rather not answer that?
I don't know that I know enough to answer it, and there may be.
Go back to Richmond.
The county, the county attorney, I mean, I think there are very specific rules about the wording and,
Right.
and grouping of projects. You know, public safety versus parks and rec versus streets and sidewalks. There are things like that that you've got to honor in setting up these questions. I'm not sure you can just say one lump sum for lots of different types of projects.
Well, we can do that.
Okay.
That's what Mr. Wilmot said.
Okay. Well, I think.
But no, because I'm just looking at it from the point of view that if we sit there and say that it's going to be option, you've got 4 choices. Option 1, and if you have 23% of the people say that, boom, 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 you're not going to have a percentage regardless.
So there's going to be 4 blocks on the ballot?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think that needs to be the case. That'd be a nightmare. It needs to be a yes or no vote.
Yes or no, that's one option.
So, Mr. Chair, the risk you take there is, like we did when we did the borrowing with the schools, with the 1-cent sales tax, is you're going to see people say, well, you know, we voted for a 2-cent tax increase. Now you guys, the future board might say, well, we're not going to do that project. And what you do by allowing them to decide option A, B, or C, you've tied the hands of the board. You've tied us. Now we're stuck with it. I'd rather just take it incrementally and just say, these are the projects we can do without a tax increase. Are you in favor of it or not? And let them see what the projects are. We can afford X amount of dollars. These are the things we can do.
But the way I look at what you just said, we can afford, correct me if I'm wrong, we can afford option 1 to do the 2 fire departments. Mm-hmm. Why do we need the citizens? I mean, we've been elected. We've been elected to make the decisions. We stand on that and make the decision now. I don't think that, I think we need to come together as a group and say that it's going to be the majority of however it lays out, and say it's going to be 1, 2, or 3.
I agree with you at 100%, because if it's a no tax increase, why do we need to ask the citizens? We've decided what we're going to do.
So, what I just heard is, I think a referendum's in order. I think, as a board, we should prioritize our public safety and go, here's what we're going to do. We're going to borrow for the 2 fire departments this year. Then next year, we will score all of the orange and do the referendum next year. And we can do that during our budget process. And then we can make that decision after these items have been scored on which referendum we want to take place in 2024. When there'll be a presidential election, there'll be more people at the voting ballot. And then we can attack all of these things once everything is scored and we have a better understanding of where we are. Because if we can do the fire departments without a referendum, we do that now, we have all this information, it's not going to change that much. And then we can have a better outlook as to what we're going to be looking at in the economy, and we buy ourselves an additional year.
So, Mr. Chriscoe, you're saying that if option A allows us to do the fire and rescue, we still need a referendum to decide that?
I'm saying we don't even do a referendum.
There you go. That's
I'm saying we borrow the money to get the fire departments what they need for now. We can get everything scored that wasn't scored because of how we handled the CIP. And then next year, we can have this decision made in April as to which way we want to go with the referendum. Because we're going to, buy ourselves a year to do this with a better understanding of what our economy's doing. Hopefully everything is rosy and our revenue is increased and we're getting more than $582,000 per penny, and we don't have to go 2 cents, we only have to go to 1 cent, and we can do everything that is in option 3 or C or whatever letter number you want to call it.
I think Mr. Chair had a good suggestion that in the next 2 weeks, we talk to each other 2-on-1 or whatever as to where we're going to go. But what Mr. Chriscoe, a one-on-one, right, sorry, has presented a scenario that we don't have the referendum this year, that we do have the money, that we do have the option of borrowing and actually borrowing pretty quickly, correct? I mean, if we decided this is where we wanted to go, we could immediately do it. We wouldn't have to wait until FY24. It would give, a go for the fire and rescue to move quickly, saving a whole year of effort. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out as something to consider.
Mr. Cole, if we were to go that route, when would funding be available? Spring?
Well, which route? No referendum, just?
Yeah, and do the.
I mean, you could put a borrowing together in 90 days if you were doing it on your own. If you wanted to participate in one of the state programs like Virginia Resources Authority, they do a fall pool and a spring pool. So you would have your choice.
All right, well, I think that gives us some time that we can talk about it over the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, first, 2 weeks. And we'll all talk amongst ourselves and go that route.
Just don't talk to yourself.
Just don't answer yourself.
I'm still shot. Thank you, Mr. Cole.
All right, thank you.
And in all seriousness, I'm not sure that you would have to come on the 1st.
No, that's fine. We'll
play it by
in.
ear, but I
Sure.
don't really see a need unless you want to just come eat dinner and help our economy so we can afford it.
Got it.
Thanks.
I'll do my best. Thank you.
All right. So, supervisor discussion.
Mr. Chair, if I might, I think the 7 of us might be tired of talking to each other tonight.
Let me discuss tonight.
Okay. Next item on the agenda, we're going to do a closed meeting. Mr. Baines, would you call us in? Read us in.
Whereas the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors desires to discuss on a particular subject in closed meeting during the course of its meeting on July 18th, 2023, and whereas the nature of the subject is personnel matters pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1, specifically the evaluation of a county attorney and county administrator, now therefore be it resolved that the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors does hereby convene in closed meeting for the purpose herein expressed pursuant to the legal authority herein recited.
So moved.
Second.
Would you call the roll?
I sure will. Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mr. Hutson.
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe.
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick.
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani.
Yes.
Mr. Gibson.
Yes.
Mr. Orth. Dr. Orth, thank you. All right.
All right. All we need is the 7 of us, and we should.
And now desires to continue in its open meeting, and whereas the only public business matters lawfully exempt from open meetings were heard, discussed, or considered during the closed meeting, the only subjects heard, discussed, and considered in said closed meeting were the matters identified in the resolution by which it was convened. Now therefore let it be resolved that the Gloucester County Board of Supervisors does hereby reconvene in open meeting at its meeting of July 18th, 2023, and certifies the matter set forth in Virginia Code Section 2.2-3712D.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Baines?
Dr. Orth?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Hutson?
Yes.
Mr. Chriscoe?
Yes.
Mr. Hedrick?
Yes.
Mr. Bazzani?
Yes.
Mr. Gibson?
Yes.
I've got, hold on. I've got one other thing. We did check with Ms. Steele to see kind of where things were going along, and she happened to point out that for us to be able to borrow money, even for the fire department, did she say it was in the fall?
FY '20, yeah, it would actually end up being FY '25. We can't borrow till fall of '24 in the option one.
Okay,
So that
Okay.
cannot happen immediately.
okay.
That- Just an update.
Okay. I will say this,
Right,
we're all creatures of habit.
right.
Mr. Baines, I would like for you to get with the official roll taking, vote taking.
Yes, sir.
You're going around in circles. It's screwing us all up.
What do you
You're-
mean? I'm writing down the list.
I know, but you jump back around.
No. Oh, because I didn't go like Carol does across the top. I went down the list. I was just doing, I was trying to be creative tonight, sorry.
But you're messing, I mean, I'm like,
Okay.
Ashley and I are looking at one another like, what in the world's going on here?
I will train myself to go properly across the page instead of down.
Ms. Cronin, will you take care of that training for him, please?
I told him it didn't matter, he could just do whatever.
Jeez.
Just gotta listen for your
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Motion, meeting's adjourned.